Welcome to the Christianity in Business podcast with host Darren Shear, an initiative of the Archie W. Dunham College of Business at Houston Baptist University. This is the show that helps Christian business leaders to integrate biblical values into business. You can get more information about HBU's Center for Christianity in Business and sign up to receive free access to all issues of the Christian Business Review Journal by visiting our website at christianityinbusiness.com.
On this episode, we're joined by Fred Sievert. Fred is the retired president of the New York Life Insurance Company, which is clearly no small company for pretty much anyone who lives in the world that has probably heard of this company. It's a Fortune 100 company. Under his leadership, New York Life first achieved a #1 market share ranking in the sale of life insurance in the United States and repeated that distinction for 7 years. Following his retirement from New York Life in 2007, Fred attended Yale Divinity School and was awarded a master's degree in religion in May of 2011. And he's the author of Grace Revealed, Finding God's Strength in Any Crisis, and the book God Revealed, Revisit Your Past to Enrich Your Future. Fred, welcome to the Christianity in Business podcast.
Thank you, Darren. Glad to be with you.
At what point did you realize God wanted to be involved in your work in business? That God wasn't just a Sunday morning God, but that he truly wanted to be involved in your work?
Well, Darren, pretty early on in my spiritual journey, I got to know Christ very well. I felt this week, actually, with Pentecost coming up, I really felt pretty early on in my career that the Holy Spirit would be guiding me and directing me. And so I relied heavily on the Holy Spirit, not just in my personal devotions and in my spirituality, but also at work. So I really felt when tough decisions came up, when things were too complicated for me to figure out, I called on the Lord very, very often. Wasn't unusual for me to pray 10 to 15 times a day, to usually short prayers, simple prayers, even in the middle of a meeting when it was a tough meeting and I was in a position where I had to make a big decision. I would often pray to myself, Lord, I don't know how to handle this. You got to give me some guidance. And I really believed that the Holy Spirit would guide me and direct me. So the Lord has been on that journey with me throughout my lifetime, and especially during my career days.
So as the president of one of the largest companies in the world, New York Life, what opportunities did you have for ministry at that role?
Well, it's interesting because New York Life, big company, at the time I was president, we had 65,000 employees and agents in 12 countries. So essentially every imaginable faith was represented among our employee base and our agents. Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, you name it, every imaginable denomination of Christians. So I had to be careful not to look like I was proselytizing, trying to convert anyone from their own faith tradition to a new one. But everybody that I dealt with understood that I was a Christian. Someone the other day was asking me how often I was giving speeches to large and small groups. And this really is not an exaggeration. I felt like almost every day I was speaking to some group, whether it was an employee who was retiring or a small group who were talking about the strategies or the vision of the company, or a big convention of 5,000 agents. I was speaking to groups all the time, and I made it very clear about my faith. And they all knew I was a Christian. So when I retired in 2007, because we were in 12 countries, I think I had at least a dozen retirement parties. And since I retired early at age 59, you would think a lot of people would say, what happened? What went wrong here? Why is this guy leaving as president at age 59? Nobody said that. Everybody understood. It was very gratifying to me. It was a real blessing that people weren't surprised that I was retiring early to go to divinity school. And it's because I expressed my faith often. I mean, people understood what God meant to me and what the Lord meant to me. And the first book I wrote, God Revealed, was 31 stories of my encounters with God over the course of my life. And probably a third or more of those stories were work-related experiences. So it was very natural for me to tell the story to a big convention of agents and also bring in the fact that I felt the experience was a message from God.
Yeah. What would be one of your favorite stories that would specifically resonate with our Christian business professionals listening? One of those stories that you shared in your book.
Well, the one that was most inspiring to me was we had a joint venture company in India, and I was a ranking member of the board. We had a partner, and I traveled to India once a quarter for a number of years to those meetings. And our partner owned hospitals and clinics. And on one of the trips, the chairman of their board said to me, "How would you like to visit one of our new cardiac facility?" And I wasn't keen on the traffic in Delhi and getting to the hospital, but I said, "Sure, let's go." Then we walked into the atrium of the hospital, really a very modern hospital. And he said to me, "As long as you're here, how would you like to observe a procedure?" And I really didn't want to do that, but I thought, well, I'm going to be in a surgical amphitheater, 12 feet above the operating table. So I said, yeah, okay. Well, unbeknownst to me, they marched me into the scrub room, had me stripped down, put on a cap, a mask, a gown, and booties, and walked me right into an operating room where they're going to perform a quadruple bypass surgery.
Wow.
And by the way, this was coming at a time in my life when I was thinking about, should I retire early? Should I go to divinity school? I kind of felt my spiritual education and development was deficient. So they marched me in there. They asked the anesthesiologist to step aside, and they put me right at the head of the operating table. My stomach's 2 inches from the top of the head of the patient. And when they opened up that chest cavity, and I saw the beating heart in front of my eyes, like only a foot and a half away, this was a profound spiritual experience for me. I mean, how often do you really think about your beating heart? And I'm watching this heartbeat, and I'm starting to cry. And I was worried that my tears are going to fall into the face of the patient, except the surgical mask was absorbing my tears. But I'm thinking to myself, how did this ever happen? How can this is God's marvelous creation right in front of my eyes, and I never even thought about this before. And how can any doctor, surgeon, not believe that this is God's remarkable creation? And I mean, it was just a profound experience. It sort of reinforced my thoughts about going to divinity school and doing a deep dive in the Old Testament and a deep dive into the New Testament. And, there's a work-related experience that, I didn't have to do anything other than observe. Mm-hmm. But, I'm just really astounded by life in any form. It changed my whole outlook on life. I called it getting a glimpse of God. And it really changed my outlook on life. I see God everywhere now. I mean, I'll go out for a walk and just look at the trees and animal life and the cosmos and plants. And, it's amazing. I don't know how anybody cannot believe in God and his creation. I was trained as an actuary, which is, very much into probability, statistics, insurance, mathematics. So my mind works that way. And you would think I'd be biased more towards science than toward religion. But I'll tell you what, to me, it is far more probable that God created mankind than mankind evolved from a single cell amoeba over billions of years. I just don't buy it. And even if I bought it, I'd have to ask the question, where did the amoeba come from? You start thinking about these things, and it's really a remarkable process your mind goes through and a reinforcement of your beliefs.
Have you ever Actually, because I know that you hire researchers and do a lot of actuarial research nowadays, even on topics that don't typically relate directly to the insurance industry, but on people's stories and so on. Have you ever done any actuarial analysis on, for example, the existence of God, things like that?
Uh, that that's a challenge. Maybe that'll be a book I write down the road. But no, I can't say that I've ever done that.
Because we've heard, for guys, Lee Strobel is a faculty member at Houston Baptist University. He's coming at it.
His stories are great. What a great story.
Yeah, from a journalist standpoint, but it'd be interesting to hear it from an actuary's standpoint.
Well, Darren, you've given me a new idea now. When you started saying research, I did hire a researcher for my second book, which is about people in severe crisis. And I hired a researcher who did a spectacular job. So when you enter in each one of these chapters in the book, I have a chapter on sexual abuse, addictions, depression, PTSD, loss of a loved one, all that kind of stuff. And I purposely hired a researcher to look at the prevalence of those things. Because I wanted the reader to read that research so they realize they're not alone. And believe me, sexual abuse, any of your listeners, you are not alone because this is so prevalent. It's shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to business school at Pace University, not far from your New York Life building there in Lower Manhattan. And I remember I never took any, actuarial courses or anything like that, but it was very clear to me in my discussions with my professors and fellow students that mathematically the actuaries really were at the highest level, like of all of the business disciplines. So I have a lot of respect for that ability because I was not a math guy.
It's a pretty intense training regimen you have to go through. I think I took 9 very, very long exams, some of them 6 hours long, over the course of about 4 years to complete the certification. So some people called it harder than getting a PhD in math. But, I quickly moved into management ranks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you were to, it almost sounds like when I've watched some of your interviews and hearing you talk, it almost sounds like when you retired, it was like this enormous weight just came off you and almost like an escape from the marketplace. Did it feel like that?
Well, I was sad to leave because I loved my job and my passion has always been to impact people's lives in a positive way. So I wasn't sure how I was going to use that coming out of divinity school. But it was a relief in the sense that I was kind of on call and working 24/7 by 52 weeks. I mean, it was an intense job when you have that many people under your leadership. But I really felt, as I said earlier, that my spiritual education and development was somewhat deficient. So I really was anxious and enthusiastic about going to divinity school. I'll tell you a funny story. I was 59 years old and I'm going to school for the first day. And I'm walking out of my home in Connecticut to go up to Yale, where I went to divinity school, carrying my book bag. And my adult daughter was visiting us, and she's in the living room, and she yells out to me as I walk out the front door. She says, don't, she said, play nice with the other kids and don't forget to share. And, it was funny at the time, but I was thinking about that as I was driving up to Yale, and I thought, it actually is kind of profound, because what I've found since retiring and going to divinity school and writing a couple of books that there's so much power there in spiritual sharing.
Sure.
It's remarkable the impact that has. I'll tell you one quick story. Before I even wrote the first book, the guy who ran the men's group of my church came to me and he said, "Fred, this men's group is becoming nothing but a social event. Can you come up with some ways to generate spiritual sharing?" So I thought about that. I prayed about that. I worked with the minister. We set up a session with like 65. It was a men's group session. 65 people at a dinner, sitting at tables of 8. And I got up and mentioned the book I was writing. And before they served the salad, I said, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you something out of my book, and I'm hoping that you will share around the table after I've told the story. So I first started out with something very safe for people to talk about, and that was how do you balance faith, family, and career? And I talked about the ways in which I tried to balance faith, family, and career. And there was a lot of engagement around each table when I asked them the question, do you have any coping techniques? Second thing I did was I told this story I told you about the epiphany in India, the seeing the open heart surgery and getting a glimpse of God. And I said, when have you gotten a glimpse of God? And again, the engagement around the table was really strong. And I by the way, I prefaced this whole thing by saying, I know men sometimes are reluctant to share their faith and they don't do it very often. And you can get very emotional. But I said, listen, crying is totally allowed. And if you want confidentiality at your table, I'm sure the men at your table will grant you that. And then the third, before dessert, I told another story, which I won't go into now, but it was about an experience I had. It's also in the book, where it was so improbable that it had to be providential. And so I asked them to think about their own background. And was there anything in your life that was so improbable that it had to be providential and not just a coincidence? Again, heavy engagement. But here's the punchline, Darren. I get home that night, and I get an email from one of the guys who was at the meeting. And he said, Fred, I sat at a table tonight with guys I have known for 15 years, but I really didn't know them till tonight. And that's the power of spiritual sharing. And sometimes it's difficult to get people to verbalize and to share it. But I've told that story just the way I just told it to you and your listeners in groups of ministers. I did a speech at the New Canaan Society in Manhattan, and there were about 4 or 5 ministers in the group. And 3 of them came up to me afterward and said, we need to do that at our church. Will you come to our church and do a similar kind of event? And since I published the first book, I've probably done that same sort of event 15 to 20 times, and it always generates the same level of sharing. And part of it, I think, is when I got up and shared my story, it gave the members in the audience permission to share theirs. And it triggered in their own minds things that had happened to them that sort of answered the questions that I posed.
Yeah. So Fred, knowing what you know now, having gone through seminary, written these 2 books, and really been on this highly introspective journey since retirement and leading into retirement, and I know that you do a lot of mentoring with young business professionals as well. Maybe we'll have a book on that soon. But if you were to go back into the marketplace and kind of coach your younger self, how would you express your Christian faith differently if you were to kind of go? Because I've asked this question to other very highly influential business leaders who have kind of gone into retirement, retired from very prestigious positions and so on. And, now they're working in nonprofits and that kind of thing. I literally, one of them said, when I asked him that question, basically that I would not go back into the marketplace. knowing what I know now, which it kind of broke my heart, because here I am trying to figure out how to serve the Lord in the business world, as is the case with probably 97% of the world's population works in a for-profit company,
Yeah.
at least the working
Right.
the
Right.
working population. So how would you coach in light of what you know now? What would you do differently?
Well, I would go back because we learn so much as we age, and as we go through, we're a product of our experiences, good and bad, successes and failures. And I've learned a lot. So I'm actually working on a third book, which is going to combine some business related tips. It's especially designed for people entering the workplace for the first time. Now, that may be young people, it might be adults, women or even men who've been staying at home and want to re enter the workplace. And it's going to start with 5 tips I've given to my daughter and others on how to fast start your career and get noticed. And it's also going to have a section on spirituality and how to bring that into the workplace. And I've sort of, as I thought about doing the book, it's forced me to think back through my experiences, what I did right, what I did wrong. And basically, it's going to have 4 or 5 tips, 6 maybe tips. And I'll give you a couple of them now, because I think it would be useful for your listeners to hear this. Because if I were going back in, I would focus on this and make sure that I was doing this every day. And some of it I did every day anyway. But one was, you got to bring Jesus to work with you. I mean, I view Jesus as a powerful business partner. I mean, he told us in Matthew 11:30 that, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I love that imagery of being yoked to Jesus. And, through the Holy Spirit, I've got a partner, a business partner that created the universe.
Yeah.
You can't find a better business partner. So that's going to be one of the tips. Another one is praying often. Pray very often for guidance from the Holy Spirit. It wasn't unusual for me to pray 10 to 15 times a day. And it usually was a very short prayer. It wasn't about making more money, getting a bonus, getting a promotion. It was never about that. It was always about doing the right thing, acting with integrity and strong ethics, and being a good role model for my employees. And it would be very short prayers. I mean, I could be in a meeting that was difficult, where a decision had to be made, and I'm the guy who's got to make it. And I say, Lord, I'm not sure what to do here. I'm not smart enough to understand this. You're going to have to help me. And I really believed, I didn't hear an audible voice, but I really believed that the Holy Spirit was speaking to me and guiding me and directing me.
Yeah. And Fred, I got a similar piece of advice recently on that point about having those regular prayer times and frequent prayer times throughout the day. The CEO through an organization called C12, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but
yeah, I've heard of them.
Christian CEOs. And one of the things that he advised me to do, and something that he was just saying what he does, and I just jumped on it, is to set 3 alarms throughout the day at 10, 2, and 6, to where for 60 seconds, you're just going to hold your hands out and just surrender the business, surrender your worries, surrender everything that's going on in your life, your family, just give it over to God verbally in those 60 seconds. And it has been such a liberating thing for me. I implemented that and been doing it ever since, and it's just changed my life to realize, like you said, that's when you really make the reality that you are yoked with Jesus. You start to really feel it. It's more than just theology. You really start to sense that in your daily life, that he's with you.
That's a fantastic practice. Absolutely. Another thing that one of the stories of my second book, which is about people in crisis who really were in severe crisis, reached out to the Lord, felt grace, the Lord's grace, God's grace, and then ultimately gave back to others through some form of ministry. But there's a guy in the book who really succumbed to temptations in the workplace, to cut corners, to to lie about certain things and negotiations, to do things that really were wrong. And so I think you really always have to act with strong values and ethics and with biblical principles in mind. And one of my favorite verses for a long time has been Matthew 8:36, which is, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? I mean, this is biblically based, and I really think that's extremely important. And this guy tells a great story. He actually went to prison over what he did. And now he speaks to groups about, setting your moral compass and doing things right and worshiping and praying in the workplace. So, there's a lot of, I've been making up a list because I'm going to be writing a book, and I've got a list of about 15 or 20, sort of biblically based principles that I could pull into the book. And yours may be another one I add.
Yeah, by all means,
setting the alarm.
Yeah, I certainly didn't originate it, so yeah, run with it. It certainly is a way to make it practical. The verse about pray continually.
Yes.
It's just one, and I was meditating more on it, and how we really need to have altars in our life. Yeah, we need to. Like, our lifestyle is worship, right? But there are those moments and times and places, and I think really for us, those are the altars of our life, and it could just be setting a simple alarm on your phone that just buzzes, once or twice. And it doesn't have to be like a loud, interruption where it's like, okay, we got to stop the meeting right now, and I'm going to do my thing. But it's so powerful, so powerful. Well, Fred, storiesofgodsgrace.com is the website. Is that the best place for people to connect with you and to learn more about your books?
Yep. I also have a big following on Facebook. It's at Fred Siev, Fred SIEV, and the number 1, at Fred Siev 1. I've had something like 250,000 likes and people following that. And I do postings most every day or every other day, and it's getting a lot. But the website, they can order the book. I mean, it's easiest to order the book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but they could also order it on the website. Stories of God's Grace, no dots or dashes, storiesofgodsgrace.com.
Excellent. Well, we'll have that linked in the show notes, as well as the full book titles, but it's Grace Revealed and God Revealed are the books for now. And we've got a third one on the way. I'm excited about that one as well. Well, Fred, thank you so much for your time and for your commitment to helping, just helping us navigate this life to discover what, to truly encounter God in a personal and authentic way, as you have, and to do that on a daily basis. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me on.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if so, we would greatly appreciate it if you would leave us a quick rating and review for the Christianity in Business podcast on iTunes. You can get more information about HBU Center for Christianity in Business at christianityinbusiness.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep integrating biblical values into your business.